All right, so let's get started. Let's open up this portrait in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, I always like to view my images in Adobe Bridge. It's a great tool for labeling your images. And so basically, if I take a shot and I've got 1,000 or so images, it can be pretty cumbersome getting through them all and deciding what you want to keep and whatnot. So you can actually rate them by using these little stars here. But what I prefer to do is actually to label them. So you just right click the ones that you like and I label them as to do. And then what I do is I set it to sort by label, and all of the to do ones will show up at the bottom. And let's say for the to do ones, I want to further decide which ones are the most important to do. Then I'll right click it, go to label, and maybe select review or approved, and just keep working my way up until I have a manageable number of images that I want to work with. So we got this in camera neutral now. This is an overexposed shot, but I really like it. It's taken on the top of a bridge, and you've got an interesting lighting from the sun getting low in the sky. And I'm going to see if there's anything I can do about this overexposed area on the face. And if not, then perhaps what I'll do is turn it into a black and white and see if it can still hold up. So I'll start by turning down those highlights a bit. Get a little more detail in my shadows by turning that up. And before I go too far with the exposure, I'm going to play around with the white balance a little bit, because it will affect some of the color, overexposed areas of color. So we'll start with the white balance selector tool. And I'm just going to select some areas that were kind of neutral gray as a starting point. So I really like the way that some areas are looking cool and other areas are looking warmer. So I'm going to start with these values, and I'm sure that's going to change once I get into the specific colors, but I think it's a pretty good base. So the challenge that I'm going to have to work with here is I want this subject to be bright enough, but not so bright in these areas where the sun is hitting really hard. I mean, technically I could take the whites and the highlights and bring them both down to nothing, but you're going to end up with a really dark, sort of grayed out image. So I'm kind of just doing a dance between these two values, trying to get something that looks like a nice smooth shift and doesn't look like it's got single hot spots that are standing out. think I'm going to start with that, and then I'll jump back into it after I work with the color a little bit. If you have any questions as I'm working, please jump into the chat, and you can ask away or talk amongst yourselves. So by bringing the red down here, I think it really brings out those lips. So getting my reds a little bit pinkier. It's a little bit of green in this image, but I don't think it's adding a lot of value, so I'm just going to bring it all the way down to the yellow side. By bringing this aqua down, I'm creating a nice balance with the skin tones. So as I'm moving all of these blues and aquas, I'm comparing to the skin, and I'm trying to find that perfect complement. And now for the saturation. I can leave the red as it is. If I was to increase it a lot, you can start to see this banding happening. If we zoom in there, you can see that separation, which doesn't look good. And if I went to the other extreme, then you're obviously getting grayed out, fully desaturated. I am going to reduce the orange a little bit because it's going to help correct this overexposed area in the skin a little bit. Just taking a bit of saturation, it's not going to look so overwhelming. Going to strip the green of most of its color. It just doesn't fit the palette. We kind of have this blue and cream color palette that's going on, and the green just doesn't really find a place in there. Strip some color out of the blue as well. I'm not going to touch the purples and the magentas because it's going to cause some issues in the dark side of the skin. And now for the luminance values. So these are the tonal values of each individual color channel. So I'm brightening up the red a little bit. The orange, I'm taking down a shade. In the yellow, I'm just increasing a little bit. I find that it's giving a nice increasing the tonal range a little bit here. Kind of breaks the flatness out by bringing some highlights into these buildings and a little bit on the face, but without causing serious problems. By bringing down the aqua a little bit, getting a little bit more definition in some of the buildings back here. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, so let's try going both extremes. I'm going to stay pretty neutral there. I actually really like the effect of having that blue brought up. For some reason it just makes all the whites in the dress pop, and just, I don't know, it just brings out some different values here. Breaks that flatness a little bit. If you got comments or any suggestions as I work through this, be happy to hear them in the chat section. What I'm trying to do is figure out what color is making up this line here. Gonna save a snapshot of here. Call that HSL, that's where we left off. So here's our camera raw defaults and where we've come so far. You can save as many snapshots as you want as you're working. It's usually a good idea. It's kind of like a save history. I think if you're using Lightroom, there's something similar to that. So here I'm just allowing the default lens profile corrections. It's recognizing the camera that I have, the 85mm f1.4G. And it says, for that particular lens, how do I need to alter this to deal with any peculiars about that lens? And you can see that it corrected some of the vignetting and a slight shift in the distortion. Sometimes you may like the look as it is and you don't want any adjustments, but for this particular one, I think it does add value. Now, as far as the cropping goes, I want to remove a little bit of that lightness on the end there. So in order to keep my proper aspect ratio, so the proper proportions that we have here, I'm going to hold down Shift as I bring it down. It makes the shot a little bit more engaging and creates a better frame. I find when you have lighter elements on the edge of the frame, it can kind of draw the eye, creates a little bit of tension on the edges. draws the eye away. So I'm going to zoom in here, and I know for sure that we've got some chromatic aberration issues going on. You can see the purple outline here and on the dress. So let's see if that removes it, and if not, we'll go into the defringe. And that doesn't seem to be correcting it either, so that means we need to adjust the range here. And you can see when I move it to the right that this line disappears. But we need to look around the image and make sure that we didn't hurt anything else when we did that. And the usual suspect would be the lips. That has similar color most of the time. So let's just turn that off and back on. And we did get a subtle shift in the lips. So I think what we'll do is we'll leave it on for now, and then when everything is said and done, we'll come back in and just grab a portion of the lips and treat that separately. So that looks like it corrected all of it. Usually there's a green that's going to take place on the other side. So there it is popping up. So let's take that. There's not a lot of green in the image overall, so we don't have to be too careful with this one. And that doesn't seem to hurt anything. We may have had some trees or something in the background, but it's pretty insignificant. Won't be dealing with grain in here. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to open this up in Photoshop. And now we're going to go right back to those lips. And we'll go back into the chromatic aberration and the color tab. We're going to remove it. We're going to remove the defringe. So you can see all the color came back to the lips. We'll remove this one too, just in case. So now we have the two copies. Just going to grab the lips here, cut them out, and we're going to paste them on top. Going to create a layer mask because we don't need that full block that I pasted in, so we're just going to make our layer mask black. And then in the areas that are significant, we're going to paint it back in. You can see the lips coming to life there already. I'm also going to add it to the nose there, which kind of got grayed out a little bit as well. And then merge those two layers together. Just select them and go Control E. And that looks like it corrected it. So now we're going to go and do some skin corrections. So we're going to do a little bit of frequency separation. I've got an action pre-made for that that's just going to set it up, save us a little bit of time. but before that, I've got to make a background copy, and I'll just run my action. Oops, let's delete that. Just need to look in my actions, see what it's running the action on. So select layer background copy. So okay, good. I've got a background copy. Okay, so what the frequency separation did was it created, my action created two layers. One that's below here, that's same as the background, just gives a little bit of a blur to it. And then it creates another one here that is an applied image set to subtract. And basically the top one is set to linear light, and it's really going to pick out all of these kind of fine details that make up the image. And we're going to be editing those to make the image look better, and we'll also be editing kind of the broad colors and the broad shapes here. And together, when those frequencies are together, it's going to create the optimal look for the skin. So let's start with the broad stuff. So we can see right away that there's some different colors in the skin that's happening here. So I'm going to grab the paintbrush. And I'm going to select some of the colors here by holding down Alt. I can do a color selection. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to set my mode to color. And I'm just going to kind of paint along. So basically, I'm matching colors. Anywhere where I see different colors that are kind of fighting each other. So kind of normalizing the skin tones here, making it consistent. And now I'm just going to go to the selection lasso, and I'm going to do some blurring. So filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. And then by doing Control F, I'm going to apply it again and again. And I'm going to smooth out all of the skin here. I've got another tutorial in the makeup series that shows you how to do this in the first video in the series, how to make frequency separations. And it goes through it step by step, so it makes it super easy for you to learn how to do that. If you just jumped in to the channel, what I'm doing here is I'm doing a frequency separation, and on the low frequency, I'm blurring the skin. Now it's not going to look blurry in the end once we add the high frequency to it. I'm also going to blur a little bit of the skin that's coming through in this bar here, the reflection. So I think that's a pretty good start. Let's do some of the high frequency and then see where we are. So let's smooth things out a little bit. So the model's skin wouldn't actually look like this. It's really exaggerating everything, but it makes the job a lot easier. So I'm using the spot removal tool, and I'm simply going through and picking out any spots that slight imperfections in the skin that are standing out. And I can see that I've got some color banding happening here. See, those are sharp transition. That's not something I can do in the high frequency, but I'll jump back and correct that in the low frequency in a minute. I find that shine in the nose is just a bit too much, so I'm going to tone that down as well. If you want to ask any questions about what I'm doing right now, you can jump into the chat, and I'll be happy to help you out. Let's make these folds slightly less prominent. A little bit of a vaccination mark there. Very easy to remove. Oops, I got rid of a freckle. I actually like freckles on the skin. It gives it a lot of interest. So if there's moles or freckles, stuff like that, those are beauty marks, and I always think they should stay. I'm gonna do a different tool for the spot that I'm working on right now. It's being a little bit difficult. Sorry, the video's slowing down my my selection here, so I'll just have to wait a minute for it to catch up. I'm just making sure my stream is still going, because something got unusually slow there. Alright, it doesn't want to select it right now, but that's okay. We can keep working on the other parts. There we go. Now we'll see if it'll let us do the patch tool. There, finally. So grab that patch. And I'm just trying to give it a little bit more texture by patching areas nearby. So we've got quite a bit more smooth now. If I turn that on and off, you can see the progress. The great thing about frequency separation is that you're not losing all the detail of the skin. You still see the pores and little bumps and crevices everywhere. If you just took the original image and you did a blur, it's just going to turn into a blurry mess, and it's not going to look natural at all. So we're going to go back into the low frequency. So we'll go on the low frequency layer. Let's see what we can do about getting rid of this awkward ridge that we have here, this ridge of color. I think at this stage, we're actually going to merge this whole skin together. So we'll go to Merge Group. And I'm going to make a new layer and just call this Skin Color. And I'm just going to paint. Let's turn this off color for just for a minute. And I'm just scouring the image for any awkward changes in color there. It looks like I'm losing my controls on my brush, so I'm going to I'm using a Cintiq, and so I'm going to go to Services, and I'm going to stop my Wacom brush, and then I'm going to start it again, and when it resets it, it's going to give me my controls back. I just lost my pressure sensitivity, so it was painting full on. And now it's pressure sensitive to how hard I push. Turn down that opacity quite a bit. So I'm trying to smooth out this transition here from the bright side that the sun is lighting up and the shadow side where it's quite a bit cooler. I've also got some issues here, a little bit of chromatic aberration. All I'm doing is sampling the color nearby and painting it in. I can turn up the opacity quite a bit more for that. And then I'm going to set that top layer to color. Looks like I overstepped slightly here. So I'm going to go back and paint that in. And now you can see that transition is a lot smoother throughout. We've got a little bit of an issue here with some chromatic aberration. See that sort of purple line that's being added to that. So I'm going to paint that out. Really easy to do. All I do is have a layer. I'm using my brush, a soft brush, and setting it to color. We've got some purple lines that are coming out here. We did remove a lot of this with the chromatic aberration and the defringe, but they're tricky. They still pop up quite a bit. And usually you get these because of your filter, the way the sun or a light hits your filter and comes through at an angle, it creates these weird effects. I think that's the worst of them. And I don't like what I did there, so I'm just going to create a mask and smooth that out a little bit. And I'm going to fix this transition a little bit. And now merge that in by going Control E. So you can see the skin has taken on a much better shape now. And I'm just going to call that the skin corrections. It's important when you merge your files or merge your layers to rename them to what they currently are. Otherwise, when you start getting like 20 or so layers, you'll start to be pretty confused. I'm going to do a few final touch-ups on the skin here before I hit the colors. Again, using the spot removal tool. If you want to, you can also use the other healing brush tool, which works in a similar way, but you just hold down Alt and select an area, and it uses that for a reference. But I find that the spot removal tool, pretty much in about 80 to 90% of the cases, it gets you exactly what you're looking for. If you're the type of person that is used to using the clone tool, I recommend that you move beyond that and you start playing around with all the other tools in here, because they all have some advantages that the clone tool doesn't have. And if you watch my video, how to remove anything in the background or something like that, it goes through each individual one of those and shows you the cases for when and when you shouldn't use them. So let's start doing some color corrections. I'm going to go to an adjustment layer and then color balance. And just going to give myself some room here on the shadows. I'm going to add a bit of red. And a little bit of magenta as well. And some blue. In the midtones, I'm going to bring the whole image towards cyan slightly. But I'm going to take out a little bit of blue. Now for the highlights. And let's turn that on and off. We've got a subtle shift, but I definitely like where it's going. And now we'll do the selective colors. Starting at the top with the red. Can I add a bit of cyan? Which is the equivalent of taking out a little bit of red. So we're going to take some of the redness out of the red, if that makes any sense to you. So these work in opposites. If you go, so you can decrease the magenta as like adding the black, and decreasing the yellow is like adding blue. And now we'll hit the yellow. And we're going to be going through each one of these colors. Photo editing is not for the impatient. If you're the type of person that wants to get it perfect in camera, you know, using a flash and using a lighting setup and everything, that's fine too. But this tutorial is more about how to perfect everything in Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to ignore the greens, just so little in there, it's not having much effect. Now onto the blues. If you have any questions, I encourage you to join the chat. Don't be shy. I'm a pretty nice guy. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Now back to the whites, neutrals, and blacks, which are pretty similar to the midtones, shadows, and highlights that we did in here. But they do give you a slightly different look, so it's a good idea just to go through it. If anything, for a final safeguard after making all of your other color adjustments. They should be pretty subtle at this stage. If you're making dramatic shifts here, then it probably gives you a good hint that you weren't very careful in your other adjustments so far. So making my black slightly darker. Okay, let's see what those color changes have done. Put them in a new group from layers. Call this color corrections. And wow, that's quite a dramatic shift. I've got a lot of pinkiness that was going on throughout the whole image. And now it's shifted quite a bit. I think we may have actually gone a bit extreme, so what I'm going to do is just take that whole group and just decrease it slightly. Let's say we'll go 75. So that just preserves a little bit of that pink still in there. But it gets all that richness in the other colors that we wanted. So I'm going to grab all of those layers and just duplicate them. Control E to merge them together. So that's just a copy of everything so far. And I'm going to do a little something here that you might want to use as kind of like a little bit of a check. Using the image auto tone, do an auto contrast, and we'll also do an auto color. So this is what Photoshop is suggesting for the colors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test out their colors against mine. And I'm going to select color, blending mode. So these are, if I go to color blending mode, what it does is it takes all the tonal values of what I did so far, and then it just applies the colors of that layer on top of it. So I think that their colors don't look as good as what I edited so far, but I do feel that they add something to it. So I'll probably end up going with the blend of those two. But first of all, I'm going to just call this auto color. And I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to be using a version of this later for auto tone. Okay, so let's go back to that color, and I'm going to turn down the opacity. And just add a little bit of their colors in there. So let's say about 25%. So I kind of use this as my sober second thought, using the auto tools. Sometimes when you're editing and you're kind of just getting into the zone, and you may be following down a path, and you're skewing your colors all towards one direction without realizing it. So that's kind of like my check. So I'm just going to get a copy of that, and I'm going to merge it down. So now we have a slight bit more of the color from the auto correction in there. And now I'm going to go back to that duplicate one that I did, and I'm going to set that one to luminosity. So what that's doing is it's taking all the auto values that we had and just using the tone portion of it, so how dark or light it is. So I want to see if that helped out the image at all. Now there's definitely some areas where it added more depth, but I think what it did is it actually kind of just blocked out all of these areas and kind of lost all the definition that we had. So let's see if we can just add a bit of it back in, but not all of it perhaps. See if that adds anything. I don't really like the look that it's doing, but it is giving me a hint that the tonal range is slightly flat. So I'm going to try another trick. I'm going to save this as bridge portrait. Hey Spuddy, welcome to the channel. Glad you could make it again. So Spuddy, for this portrait, I'm not sure when you jumped in, but we did some color corrections, and before that we did some frequency separation on the skin. And now we're doing some final tweaking of the tones. So I'm going to jump back into Adobe Camera Raw, and I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick for testing out your tones. I'm going to go to Convert to Grayscale, and basically I'm going to adjust all of the tones in here without worrying about color. I'm just treating it as though it was a black and white image, trying to get the exact look that I want. So that's something that I think looks pretty good as a black and white image. So I'm going to open that up in Photoshop. And Control A will select everything. Control X will copy it. And now I'm going to paste that right on top. And I'm going to call this tone test. So now we're going to use the colors of what's below, but we're going to use the luminosity or the tones on top. And now let's run our test. And that's interesting. It gives a different look. But I think what our tone test is showing us is that our tones are actually pretty good. I would say they're even better than what we had before. So I'm happy with the test. So let's just delete that. And we'll go on to do our noise reduction pass. So there's not a lot of noise in this image, but I think it's good practice to remove a little bit if you can. Unless you're going for a gritty photo, then of course it's happy to leave it in. So under filter, I'm going to my free Nick collection that I got from Google, and define 2 is the noise reduction. Make sure you navigate to an important part of the image, something that shows a little bit of the background, a little bit of the foreground. Now there's a slight improvement on the noise reduction, so let's OK that. Now I'm going to jump right back in there, and I'm going to do my sharpening with the output sharpener. There's also a pre-sharpening tool in there as well. Now I think that is far too strong. So let's get this back to the default, and I wonder if there's if anyone's aware if there's a default setting for this. I think that would be pretty cool. I'm still pretty new to this. Yeah. Okay, I'll just get it back to the default here. I think that looks pretty good. It's not drawing out all these pores. So let's OK that. Gonna create a layer mask. And on that mask. I'm going to paint black in the background. Oops. So I don't want this background to be sharpened. It doesn't really add anything to have a sharp background unless your whole image is, you know, a landscape and you want to get every last little detail in there. But this is a portrait, so it's not so much about the background. I think I'm actually going to do a slight bit of getting rid of the sharpness and some of the skin here. I don't want all of this to stand out quite so much. We'll leave the lips, the nostrils and the eyes nice and sharp. But there's no point in showing every pore of the skin here. It doesn't add anything to the image. So we're just removing the sharpen from the skin. Making sure we leave some of the details in the ears, eyes, and nose. And the lips. So that keeps that nice and smooth, but keeps the other areas of the foreground sharp, like the dress and the purse, the major creases in the eyes and the hair. Now there's something that I said I was going to do, and now I'm near the end, and I didn't do it, but I'm going to show you how I would do it if I was to correct it. There's a gap in the hair here that doesn't look so great. So what I was going to do was, let's go back into Camera Raw. And we're going to steal the settings that we used for this image. We're going to copy them. Then we're going to go back to, I'm going to find another image that was in that same set. It actually had the full hair. I would say something like, just trying to find the best one here. Let's go with this one. Then we'll just go to Develop Settings and paste it. So that's should be all the same settings in there. And if we open that up, you know what? I'm going to close that before I open it up, I'm actually going to just do a crop in, so we have a little bit more to work with in here. And now let's open it up. And I'm going to try it with this one as well. So I'll go to Paste Settings. And I'm going to crop in here. Open that up as well. So I'm going to grab the part of the face here and just paste it into the image that we were working with. So that's one alternative. I could go with the hair that just kind of finishes off there. Or I could cut this out. And I could go with the full image of the hair that goes in here. And I think I'll actually go with the little cropped version, so I can delete that. And then what I would have done if I had more time was I would have just did all the same processing effects here. I would have cut this in, pasted it in, created a layer mask, and just went in here, filled it all in, made sure that I copy and paste a portion that would fill in that section, and just make it blend in perfectly with the same color corrections and that. So there you go. That's the final tutorial